Nestled amidst the verdant valleys and endless Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, a structure rises defiantly, seemingly challenging both nature and time. Biltmore Mansion, the largest private estate ever built in the United States, has long been a symbol of the extravagant luxury of the Gilded Age, but also a chilling testament to the price a powerful family paid for reaching unprecedented heights of wealth in American history. The story begins in the late 19th century, when the nation entered a period of rapid industrialization, and the Vanderbilt name resonated like thunder in the economic sky, associated with railroads, vast fortune, and an insatiable thirst for legacy. George Washington Vanderbilt II, the youngest and least expected son of the family, was the one who harbored the most ambitious and audacious aspirations of all. While his brothers immersed themselves in fierce business competition, George, with a soul drawn to art, literature, and tranquility, dreamed of creating an eternal refuge, a perfect world isolated from the noise of industry and the ever-changing upheavals of society. To realize this idea, George sought refuge in Asheville, a region with a pristine climate that doctors of the time considered a sanctuary for weary souls. It was there, amidst the vast forests and mountains, that he envisioned a private domain, a place not only to live, but to demonstrate the absolute power of the Vanderbilt family. From the 1880s onwards, the American landscape was illuminated by a stark contrast. The ultra-wealthy flaunted their luxury in the marble buildings of New York and Newport, while outside their gates stood the weary workers who contributed to the prosperity they would never enjoy. George grew up in that world, but he stood apart from the ruthlessness of the marketplace. He found solace in the family library, with its thousands of books, maps, travel manuscripts, and sketches of European architecture. From his teenage years, George was fascinated by French Renaissance mansions, Loire castles, and English estates, where art and tranquility blended together as another definition of wealth. When his father, William Henry Vanderbilt, died in 1885, George inherited a vast fortune, equivalent to hundreds of millions of dollars in today's value. It was a pivotal moment, opening the door for the Biltmore dream to become a reality. But beneath that seemingly pure dream lay the complex layers of a crumbling empire. The absolute wealth of the Vanderbilts was not immutable. It depended on a business system facing fierce competition, legal changes, and increasing pressure from the labor movement. George probably didn't realize that when he started building Biltmore, his family was also entering a period of decline that none of them were astute enough to see through. In 1888, George decided to purchase his first estate in Asheville, initially just over 2,000 acres, but quickly expanding to over 125,000 acres, an area equivalent to an entire county. Each land transaction was conducted discreetly to avoid the attention of the press and the public. He wanted a personal kingdom, a place not only to live but also to rule. However, to build the grand structure he envisioned, George needed a superior architectural mind. And that's when the talented architect Richard Morris Hunt embarked on the most audacious project of his career. Hunt, the first American architect trained at the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, understood the language of luxury, power, and symbolism. He had designed Marble House and the Breakers for the Vanderbilt family, two magnificent mansions considered by the upper class as the gold standard for success. But Biltmore was something else entirely. It wasn't just a house bigger than others, it was the almost paranoid vision of a man who carried within him both romanticism and a fear of being forgotten. Hunt chose the Shadowy architectural style, inspired by 16th-century French castles, with its spires, intricate carvings, and decorative details that only master craftsmen could create. Alongside Hunt was a second figure who would shape the entire Biltmore landscape, Frederick Law Olmsted, the father of American landscape architecture. He was the man who gave the world New York's Central Park, one of the most famous landscape designs in American history. When George approached Olmsted, he was in his twilight years, his health failing, but his vision remained as sharp and expansive as ever. Olmsted initially opposed the Asheville site, arguing that the land was too rugged, the slopes too steep, the climate too erratic, and unsuitable for nurturing an iconic garden. But after exploring the entire site, he recognized its extraordinary potential. It could not only become a family estate, but also a national historic landmark. The scene in the early years of Biltmore's construction was chaotic and intense. A workforce of over 1,000 laborers and craftsmen set up camps on the mountain, living in makeshift wooden houses, working day and night alongside red-hot brick kilns and blocks of limestone transported from afar by makeshift rail. A separate railway system was built solely to transport materials to the construction site. Horse-drawn wagons and steam engines operated incessantly, their rumbling echoing throughout the valley. Biltmore gradually emerged from the dust, the sounds of chiseling wood, hammering stone, and steam rising like the breath of a colossal creature taking shape. But behind all that activity lay a little-known fact: Biltmore cost an enormous amount of money even before it was completed. George paid for everything out of his own pocket, no borrowing, no investment, no involvement in the business. It was a purely personal dream, and therefore, a personal burden no one could share. In the eyes of friends and family, George was both eccentric and genius. They admired his sophistication, but secretly worried about the rate of spending that exceeded all conventional standards. In 1895, after many years of construction, Biltmore officially opened on Christmas Day. This event was seen as a glorious moment, marking the culmination of the Vanderbilt family's vision, fortune, and reputation. However, few in that vast house knew that the very moment the doors opened marked the beginning of another dark journey for the family, a journey of financial ruin and a multi-generational rift in their legacy. Biltmore was more than just a mansion. It was the final declaration of the Gilded Age, an era built of gold but rotten from within. As the chilly December air of 1895 descended upon the Blue Ridge Mountains, bringing with it the pure breath of the Southern American winter, Biltmore entered the moment George Washington Vanderbilt had envisioned for nearly a decade. On the evening of December 24th, the shimmering light from hundreds of candles and crystal chandeliers bathed the vast foyer, creating a magnificent spectacle unlike anything guests had ever seen in any American mansion. The main Christmas tree, taller than 3 stories, was adorned with gold-plated ribbons and exquisite glass ornaments imported from Germany, reflecting the dazzling light onto the meticulously carved cream-colored limestone walls. On this momentous evening, the leading figures of American high society gathered: industrialists, philanthropists, bankers, and members of some of the most prestigious families on the East Coast. They came not only to congratulate George, but also to witness the culmination of the greatest construction project of the Gilded Age. Whispers of amazement echoed through the corridors, the towering rooms with ceilings mimicking the 16th century French style. The European artworks acquired during George's travels, and especially the library with nearly 2,000 volumes where he spent most of his time reading, studying, and contemplating the boundless world of knowledge. To the soothing sounds of the string orchestra, George appeared not as a tycoon, but as a quiet scholar, standing among his guests, yet somewhat detached. He lacked the arrogant confidence of his brothers, who had dominated the business world. George's appeared pensive, his gaze deep, a man who had devoted his life to books and a closer relationship with nature than to power. But it was precisely this difference that made him the perfect symbol of Biltmore, a building not constructed to impress in social competitions, but to nourish the soul. His wife Edith Stuyvesant Dresser doesn't appear in this painting, as they hadn't met when Biltmore opened. But looking at the dazzling scene, one can easily imagine that George remained alone in his own kingdom. The vast, opulent rooms, where every corner is perfectly designed, seem to reflect the quiet solitude of a romantic heart with no one to fully share it with. Biltmore, even on its opening night, already felt like a palace built for an uncrowned king, a man haunted by the concept of legacy, the underlying reason why the mansion became a burden for future generations. But behind that dazzling light were simmering undercurrents. From its early days, the operating costs of Biltmore far exceeded all expectations. With over 250 rooms, thousands of square meters of interior space, and hundreds of workers needed for cleaning, gardening, and mechanical maintenance, the cost of maintaining the building reached a level that would have deterred even the wealthiest Americans of the time. The cost of fuel alone to operate the boilers consumed a colossal sum each year. Richard Morris Hunt, the brilliant architect of Biltmore, died just before the mansion's opening. His passing left a huge void for George. Hunt was the only one who fully understood his vision, the subtlety, the perfectionism, and the desire to build a structure that transcended all boundaries. George stood silently in his library for days after the inauguration, reflecting on the path he had taken, and perhaps the paths ahead, which he began to fear. Meanwhile, Frederick Law Olmsted continued to oversee the Biltmore landscape, despite his significantly declining health. Those who worked with him recounted that he often lingered for long periods before the expansive hillsides, where he tried to envision how to transform the wild mountain landscape into a verdant paradise that would enhance the grandeur of the mansion. The Italian gardens, the cobblestone walkways, the meticulously arranged rows of trees all reflected the sophistication of a man who had spent his life transforming nature into art. Yet Olmsted also warned George about Biltmore's uncertain financial future. He knew that such a structure could not sustain itself, and George was not as ambitious a businessman as his brothers. At this time, the media began to refer to Biltmore as the greatest private castle in American history, but this praise was accompanied by whispers of extravagance. The press questioned whether Biltmore was the last sign of the Gilded Age, an era already beginning to show its cracks, as powerful families were swept up in the whirlwind of competition, inflation, and the dizzying pace of industrial change. Some believed George was fleeing a world that was modernizing too quickly. Others suggest he was trying to create a legacy his father and grandfather never achieved, a timeless symbol, not a train or a company, but an aesthetic kingdom. But whatever the true motivation, Biltmore was from the beginning destined for something unsustainable. Every brick, every window, every inch of land was a testament to boundless ambition, and that placed on George Vanderbilt a weight he could not have imagined in his youth. Christmas Eve 1895 was his peak, and like every glorious story in history, that peak was fleeting before darkness began to creep into his life and the legacy he left behind. The early 20th century brought a period of profound upheaval to America. As industrialization expanded, social reform movements flourished, and economic instability became a constant source of worry. Biltmore, with all its splendor set apart from contemporary society, became a testament to the fragility of wealth. George Vanderbilt, though not directly involved in the economic or political struggles of his family, could not escape the subtle forces tightening around the financial empire he inherited. For George, Biltmore was more than just a house. It was a symbol of the purest aspects of his soul. But precisely because it was not a commercial project, but a personal dream, it became an enormous financial burden that no source of revenue could ever offset. Each month, the expense reports sent to George's study revealed enormous expenditures, paying the salaries of hundreds of workers, maintaining the electrical and plumbing systems, tending the gardens, constantly repairing parts of the estate affected by the mountainous climate, and even raising livestock, horses, and crops at the vast Biltmore estate. Each expense added up to a figure that would make even the wealthiest industrialist in America wary. In 1898, George married Edith Stuyvesant Dresser, an intelligent, refined woman with a deep humanistic education. Edith's arrival brought new life to Biltmore. She was not only the life partner George had always lacked, but also someone who understood the financial challenges facing the estate. With her practical nature and composure, Edith began to reorganize the management structure, oversee the workforce, and propose many cost-saving solutions while maintaining the integrity of the building. However, even her efforts could not change the fact that Biltmore was so expensive that no family, however wealthy, could sustain it indefinitely. When their daughter Cornelia Vanderbilt was born in 1900, the atmosphere at Biltmore was filled with joy and hope. George devoted more time to his family, to the vast library, and to long walks in the gardens that Olmsted had designed. But while the outside world changed rapidly, Biltmore remained a stagnant kingdom, and that was the biggest problem. Its tranquility increasingly conflicted with the pace of economic growth, the rise of the middle class, and the reforms taking place everywhere. American society entered a new era where grand mansions were no longer symbols of prosperity, but began to be seen as relics of a wasteful age. George sensed the winds of change, and he began to worry that Biltmore, the beauty he had created, would become a burden on his family in the future. Therefore, he expanded the agricultural model at Biltmore, transforming it into one of the largest experimental farms in America. He collaborated with experts in agriculture and forestry, hoping that Biltmore could sustain itself by producing high-quality produce and becoming a center of advanced research. Olmsted, before his death in 1903, helped George create America's first scientifically managed forest, a lasting legacy that Biltmore could be proud of. However, even these models took time to become profitable, while operating costs continued to rise. In the years following 1905, many of the Vanderbilt family's businesses began to decline. Lawsuits, fierce competition in the railroad industry, and changes in antitrust laws impacted the family's income streams. Biltmore, which relied entirely on George's personal fortune, suddenly became more fragile than ever. While George's half-brother Cornelius Vanderbilt II retained considerable power within the family, George was excluded from crucial business decisions. This left him with limited access to the cash flow of the large companies controlled by the family. The following years saw George become increasingly pensive and anxious. Several of his private letters reveal his clear awareness that he was trading a large portion of his fortune for Biltmore. He had no regrets, but he understood that this price would affect not only him but also Edith and Cornelia in the future. The estate was like a living organism, fat, expensive, and perpetually hungry for money. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but also demanded constant sacrifice. In the early 1910s, America entered a period of economic stress, followed by World War I. Global upheavals caused raw material costs to skyrocket, markets to become unstable, and the Vanderbilt family's investments to suffer. Other wealthy families in Newport and New York also began closing or selling off their summer residences because they could no longer sustain them. It was a general trend, an era was ending. Many saw it. George saw it most clearly, but he couldn't give up Biltmore. It wasn't just his property, it was his heart and soul. And then, in 1914, an event occurred that made all his anxieties a reality. That was the day George Vanderbilt died suddenly after a routine surgery, leaving Edith and their young daughter Cornelia with a huge mansion, a vast experimental farm, and mountains of financial responsibilities beyond imagination. From that moment on, Biltmore fell into a state of limbo, a structure no one was capable of continuing on the scale that George had maintained. His death marked the beginning of the darkest period in Biltmore's history. The sudden death of George Washington Vanderbilt II on March 6, 1914, was a shock not only to his family, but also to the entire structure he had spent more than 2 decades building. In that moment, Edith Stuyvesant Vanderbilt, a woman accustomed to the quiet, unassuming role of supporting her husband, became the sole pillar of a vast but fragile empire. She had lost not only her life partner, but also a legacy teetering on the brink of collapse. Biltmore, enchantingly beautiful and impossibly vast, became the responsibility of a solitary widow, along with her young daughter, Cornelia, only 14 years old. In the days following the funeral, the atmosphere at Biltmore was heavy and somber. Rooms once brightly lit by chandeliers were now shrouded in darkness, and the long, wide corridors echoed with the solitary footsteps of the butlers and servants. Edith spent days in the library, where George used to read for hours on end, trying to grasp the full extent of her husband's financial legacy. The numbers before her were no longer abstract concepts. They were a stark warning: no one could run Biltmore on its former scale without going bankrupt. In his will, George left Edith full control of the estate and all related assets. But those assets, once symbols of prosperity, were depleting faster than any individual could manage. The cost of running the estate, including paying the salaries of over 600 employees, maintaining the vast gardens, and servicing the electrical, plumbing, and heating systems throughout the winter far exceeded what was acceptable for a family that had lost its primary source of income. Investments in the railroad industry, the mainstay of the Vanderbilt family, were dwindling in value due to reforms, competition, and changes in ownership structures in the American economy. All of this presented Edith with a major question: could she save Biltmore? And was it worth saving? But Edith was unlike the upper-class women of the time, who often resigned themselves to their fate upon their husbands' deaths. She possessed a practical, persistent, and decisive spirit, qualities George had deeply admired. She understood that Biltmore was not merely a symbol of luxury, it was her husband's lifelong passion. Losing it was something Edith would never accept. Instead of a gentle downsizing or scaling back, Edith began a radical, almost cold, restructuring of the entire estate. Her first step was to reduce the workforce. Dismissing hundreds of workers was not an easy decision, but it was inevitable. She reduced the number of cooks, gardeners, housekeepers, craftsmen, and even stable hands. Some gardens received less maintenance, and some areas of the estate were closed off entirely. The large doors that were once wide open to welcome visitors are now closed, with only essential staff remaining. However, even after the cuts, Biltmore's operating costs remain higher than they could be. Therefore, Edith began to consider a bolder path to transform Biltmore, for the first time in history, into a public site. This idea in 1915 was almost a shock to American high society. Opening a private mansion, and the largest in the nation at that, to the public was unprecedented. Many in the Vanderbilt family strongly opposed it, considering it a humiliation to the family. But Edith understood that times had changed. She faced reality squarely. Biltmore could not survive in isolation and pride. The outside world was changing. War, financial depression, and changing lifestyles were making enormous mansions increasingly obsolete. If Biltmore wanted to survive, it had to transform itself. In 1930, after years of deliberation, negotiation, and restructuring, Edith and Cornelia made a historic decision to open Biltmore to the public for a small fee. The sight of early-century automobiles lined up at the estate's main gate was something no one from the Gilded Age could have imagined. Ordinary citizens stepped into the grand halls, gazing up at the high ceilings and European artworks, a sight previously reserved only for the elite, and no one could deny they were witnessing the last symbol of the Gilded Age. Biltmore thus became a part of American history, not just as a family mansion, but as a witness to the transition between 2 centuries, from the era of powerful aristocratic families to a democratized society, where symbols of power became shared cultural heritage. With this new source of revenue, Edith was able to maintain Biltmore at a minimum cost, enough to preserve its most important values. But the following years were far from easy. The economic turmoil of the Great Depression made running the estate even more difficult. Cornelia, Edith's daughter, grew up and gradually moved away from Asheville, seeking her own life and losing interest in the enormous estate her father had built. This left Edith to shoulder almost all the responsibility. However, with unwavering determination, Edith kept Biltmore standing just as it threatened to collapse completely. She became the quietest but most important figure in the estate's history, the one who saved the kingdom. George had created from his dreams and obsessions. In the mid-1920s, as America entered the false prosperity of the Roaring Twenties, Cornelia Vanderbilt, George and Edith's only daughter, had grown into a beautiful young woman, a prominent figure in high society. Cornelia inherited her mother's elegance and her father's thoughtfulness, but she grew up in a world turned upside down. While other upper-class youths enjoyed summers in Newport and New York, Cornelia lived in an overwhelmingly vast but silent mansion, where every hallway reminded her of a father who had died too soon, and a mother who was trying to cling to what remained of the past. For Cornelia, Biltmore was both a solitary paradise and a gilded cage. From a young age, she ran through the grand corridors, studied in the library where her father used to sit for hours, listened to the wind whistling through the arched windows, and watched her mother work tirelessly to maintain a dwindling legacy. But as she grew older, she began to understand that her life was unlike anyone else's. No friends, no community, only servants, stewards, and an estate that was becoming too large for one person to bear. The turning point for Cornelia came in 1924, when she married John Francis Amherst Cecil, a British diplomat from an old aristocratic family. The marriage was initially seen as a way to solidify the family's position and expand Biltmore's influence beyond America. John Cecil was a calm, refined man who understood the world of European aristocratic families, where grand mansions existed not only through wealth, but through long-established social structures. In the early years after their marriage, Cornelia seemed to find new joy. She hosted small parties, recreating in some way the solemn atmosphere of the lavish ceremonies of the Gilded Age. But observing Biltmore, John soon realized what George had foreseen before his death: the estate was too large to survive in the new era. The financial successes of Biltmore Farm, a pioneering agricultural project, were insufficient to cover operating costs. Increasingly, Cornelia felt more like a guardian than an heir. The opening of Biltmore to the public in 1930 was a historic turning point, but it also exposed the truth: Cornelia no longer saw Biltmore as her home. While Edith continued to dedicate her life to preserving her husband's legacy, Cornelia felt increasingly alienated from her birthplace. For her, those vast rooms were the legacy of a dead world, a place unsuitable for young people living in a new, more vibrant and secular society. The pressures of running Biltmore, public expectations, and mental isolation gradually led Cornelia to become disillusioned. She felt trapped between two worlds: on one side, the past she had to preserve, and on the other, the personal life she longed to live. In letters to friends, Cornelia revealed that living in a mansion considered a national symbol was suffocating, lonely, and demanded sacrifices that no one understood. In 1932, Cornelia and John Cecil had two sons: George Henry Vanderbilt Cecil and William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil, who would later play a pivotal role in determining Biltmore's fate. But the birth of the two children could not salvage their crumbling marriage. John remained attached to Biltmore, viewing it as a lifelong responsibility, while Cornelia felt the estate had become a symbol of a chain of constraints, pulling her away from the life she truly desired. In 1934, amidst prolonged tension and exhaustion, Cornelia made a decision that shocked the family. She left Biltmore and never returned. She changed her name, embarked on a journey of artistic exploration, pursued her own life in Europe, and gradually distanced herself from all ties to the vast estate her parents had built with love and sacrifice. Cornelia's death marked the most serious rift in the Vanderbilt family regarding Biltmore. It represented a generational conflict between an old world, bound by immortal structures and aristocratic ideals, and a modern world where individuals have the right to choose their own lives without being constrained by historical expectations. As Edith watched her daughter leave, she understood that Biltmore would never again be a family home. It had become a cultural legacy, an entity transcending blood ties, and thus, a solitary one much like George himself. Edith remained in Asheville, both keeping the estate running and protecting her husband's memory, but she knew that the weight of Biltmore now rested on the shoulders of the new generation, who would have to decide whether that legacy should be maintained or abandoned. When Cornelia Vanderbilt left Biltmore and a long chapter of family history closed, the mansion's future became more uncertain than ever. Edith, though strong and resilient, had aged considerably after years of bearing responsibilities beyond her capabilities. She continued to maintain Biltmore in silence, but she understood that the final decision would rest with the next generation, George's two grandsons, too young to comprehend the magnitude and danger of the legacy bequeathed to them. For the remainder of her life, Edith sought to prepare Biltmore for its future. No longer George's personal refuge, Biltmore had become a public heritage, a witness to the Gilded Age, and a colossal economic challenge that only the most resolute could bear. She maintained public access, developed agriculture to generate a stable income, and protected much of the forest by selling 87,000 acres to the federal government, a bold and strategic move that would later form the Pisgah National Forest. For Edith, this wasn't a loss, but a way to protect both the forest and Biltmore from being sold off. When signing the transfer agreement, She said something recorded in historical documents, "George wants this place to outlast us. This is the only way to do that." In 1955, Edith passed away. She departed with a serenity few can achieve when facing a vast legacy at a historical crossroads. But the big question remains, where would Biltmore go without the guiding hand of the woman who saved it from destruction? The answer lies with Cornelia's two sons, George Henry Vanderbilt Cecil and William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil. As adults, the two brothers chose contrasting paths, much like the two threads of destiny running through Biltmore, one oriented towards practical agricultural business, the other towards preserving cultural heritage. George Henry, the elder brother, was taciturn, practical, and had a solid business acumen. He saw the estate's future in agriculture, especially dairy production. Meanwhile, William, the younger brother, was romantic and decisive, like his grandfather. He believed Biltmore could become a prominent cultural and historical destination, not only in North Carolina, but throughout the United States. In later years, the Cecil brothers divided responsibilities. George Henry took over the Biltmore Dairy Farm, while William managed the estate and developed tourism. This wasn't just a family decision. It was a turning point that pulled Biltmore out of a near-salvage situation. For the first time since George Vanderbilt, the two heirs had found a sustainable model for operating a structure that most experts believed couldn't survive. In William's hands, Biltmore quickly expanded its influence. He improved the infrastructure, developed services, added gardens for visitors, and built educational programs about Gilded Age history. He understood that Biltmore's beauty lay not in its size and opulence, but in its story, a story of a family's aspirations, love, perseverance, and tragedy that helped shape modern America. Meanwhile, George Henry's Biltmore Dairy became a successful agricultural model, renowned for its high-quality dairy products. It generated a steady income that supported the preservation of the estate and proved that Biltmore's land, if properly managed, could sustain itself. But even as the future loomed brighter, Biltmore carried deep wounds. Cornelia, the rightful heir, refused to be associated with it. Her final letters reveal that she remained haunted by memories of a lonely childhood spent in the vast corridors. When the family celebrated the opening of new areas, Cornelia never returned, though she lived to see 1976. She detached herself from the mansion, from the family story, and from the very identity she was born to inherit. Cornelia's absence cast a vague shadow over Biltmore for decades. Visitors were unaware, but historians understood that a family's legacy is measured not only by what they leave behind, but also by what causes them to leave. Biltmore endures because of Edith's loyalty, William's determination, and George Henry's pragmatism, but it also survives because of Cornelia's escape, which forces the family to confront the truth that Biltmore is not a gift, but a reminder of an era built on gold, but one that crushed many. As the 20th century progressed and America entered a new age, Biltmore became an increasingly popular destination for visitors from all over the world. They came not only to see America's largest mansion, but to touch the story of a family that lived through glorious triumphs and silent tragedies. The limestone walls, the Italian gardens, the long corridors, and the vast library all tell a story not of luxury, but of the price that luxury demanded. But Biltmore's journey is not over. It remains a living entity, continuing to be shaped by time, history, and its keepers. In the latter half of the 20th century, as steel mills began to close and old industrial cities faded into oblivion, Biltmore, a legacy rooted in the Gilded Age, unexpectedly came back to life. It was no longer a family home, but a cultural institution, a historical machine operating in parallel with the changes of modern American society. The man behind this remarkable revival was William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil, grandson of George Vanderbilt, who returned from Europe with a clear vision and eyes that saw a future others missed. Upon taking over his share of the legacy in the 1960s, William faced a harsh reality. Biltmore needed more than just tours and tickets sold at the door. Although visitor numbers remained steady, preserving the architecture, restoring the interior, maintaining the gardens, and modernizing the electrical and plumbing systems in a mansion with over 250 rooms was far beyond the potential revenue from tourism alone. Some experts even suggested dividing the estate, selling off some land, or turning the mansion into a national museum. But William refused to accept that. He believed that Biltmore had to be maintained as a private property, as George Vanderbilt had wished, not belonging to the state, not to an anonymous organization, but to the descendants of the family themselves. That belief placed an almost absurd burden on William's shoulders. The 1960s and 1970s were a time of soaring preservation costs, forcing many large mansions in the eastern United States to close or be demolished. The Vanderbilt families, the breakers in Newport, had to open to the public through the Newport Preservation Society. Other estates like Rosecliff and Marble House followed a similar path. But William, with almost stubborn determination, kept Biltmore independent. To achieve this, he built a new business model, one that George Vanderbilt's time had never imagined. Biltmore became a self-sustaining economic ecosystem. Tourism was central, but surrounding it were complementary businesses, restaurants, cafes, entertainment centers, historical education services, souvenir shops based on the estate's interior design, and later, one of the biggest turning points, the construction of the Biltmore Winery. Based on the estate's agricultural traditions, William believed that wine could become the estate's iconic product, and he was right. In the years that followed, Biltmore Winery not only became a significant source of revenue, but also elevated Biltmore to a complete destination, where history, landscape, and cuisine combined into a holistic experience. However, behind this picture of success lay underlying tensions. Many historians pointed out that the commercialization of Biltmore risked eroding the spirit of the estate. Some members of the conservation community wanted Biltmore to retain its pristine historical character, while William believed that without revenue, there could be no conservation. This debate lasted for decades, reflecting the tug-of-war between two opposing philosophies: respect for the past and adaptation to the present. Each year, hundreds of thousands of visitors flocked to Biltmore, strolling through the limestone corridors where George once gazed upon the world, admiring the European paintings he brought back with pure artistic passion, and wandering through the Italian gardens designed by Olmsted. But those familiar with history know that Biltmore doesn't exist simply to tell stories of opulence. It exists to commemorate a struggle spanning over a century between ambition and burden, between legacy and sacrifice. As we enter the 21st century, Biltmore has become a modern family business, run primarily by descendants of William Cecil. They no longer live in the mansion in keeping with the spirit of the new era. Biltmore now belongs to the public rather than a family. But it is precisely this separation that has helped the mansion endure, free from the personal lives of its heirs, as was the case during Cornelia's time. The modern-day Biltmore is a strange blend of dream and reality, a structure built from George Vanderbilt's yearning to transcend his era, yet sustained only by cold, calculated business strategies. It is both fairy-tale-like and starkly economic, and whether you gaze upon it in the clear morning light or the glorious sunset, you can always sense the subtle shadow that envelops the entire structure, the shadow of trade-offs, something that cost the Vanderbilt family more than anyone ever dared to admit. Today, upon entering the main gates of Biltmore Estate, visitors are easily overwhelmed by the breathtaking beauty of the landscape that unfolds before them. Tree-lined paths lead to the massive limestone mansion, its soaring tiled roofs and arched windows reflecting the morning sun. Many come here to admire the opulence, to photograph the idyllic scenery, or to visit the winery and enjoy a glass of rich red wine. But beneath all that lies a story. Not everyone knows the story of generations who lived in the light of glory and in the shadow of silent sacrifice. Biltmore does not exist today because it was created to last forever. On the contrary, it was born from the private aspirations of a quiet man who wanted to create a personal paradise rather than a national heritage. But precisely because it is so large, so beautiful, so complete, it is beyond the control of those who created it. Each generation of Vanderbilts, after George, faced a painful choice: either shoulder the responsibility or let go to avoid being swept into the endless cycle of costs, expectations, and obligations. Of all those, three names stand out: George, Edith, and William. one builder, one savior, and one rebuilder. They are the three pillars of the legacy, three threads connecting a story spanning over a century, and if any one of them hadn't been strong enough, persistent enough, or had enough love for Biltmore, the mansion might have vanished long ago, sold off, divided up, or ravaged by time. But there is another layer of legacy, lighter and more vague, yet no less important: the darkness. The darkness of the loneliness that George carried with him when he built Biltmore as a counterweight to a world he didn't belong to. The shadow of responsibility weighed heavily on Edith's shoulders, forcing her to live her life in quiet perseverance, unnoticed by anyone. And the shadow of escape lingered in Cornelia's heart, a woman unable to bear the expectations of a legacy not of her choosing. Biltmore is not just architecture, it is a story of trade-offs. If George hadn't squandered almost his entire inheritance, the mansion wouldn't have survived. If Edith hadn't sacrificed her life for it, Biltmore would have closed in 1915. If William hadn't seen the commercial potential of a once-fallen legacy, Biltmore wouldn't be the famous destination it is today. This truth makes Biltmore, both magnificent and melancholic, a brilliant symbol built from what this family has lost. Today, millions visit each year, strolling through the Olmsted Gardens, admiring George's bookshelves, and marveling at the exquisite carvings that thousands of artisans sculpted into the stone more than a century ago. But few see the fragile layers of memory that linger in every corridor. If you stand still in the ballroom, you can almost hear the music from the 1895 Christmas opening. If you sit quietly in the library, you can sense George's long nights reading by oil lamp, searching for meaning amidst thousands of pages of European literature. And if you look out at the verdant hills, you can imagine Edith walking alone after George's death, wondering if she had the strength to keep her promise to her husband. Biltmore endures because it embodies both light and darkness. It is a testament to greatness, but also a warning to those who believe that wealth, power, or beauty can last forever without sacrifice. It preserves the best of the Gilded Age, but also reminds us of the price of that extravagance: broken families, lonely lives, and people who sacrifice their happiness to uphold a dream bigger than themselves. And finally, as the sun sets behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, casting a soft golden light over Biltmore, its true nature becomes clearest. A castle never built to stand alone, yet it stands proud, silent, and full of untold stories. That is Biltmore's true legacy, not in its grandeur, but in the people who loved it so much they were willing to accept the darkness to keep the light for the world.